Imagine for a second that you have a microscope,
Okay.
but instead of looking at, a glass slide with cells or bacteria, you're looking at the American economy.
Mm.
Usually when we talk about the economy, we're zoomed way, way out. We see these big, blurry blobs headlines like inflation, the green transition, the mental health crisis. It's all very abstract.
Right, it's the macro view. It's what you see on the news tickers.
Exactly. But what happens if you zoom in? I mean, really, really close, past the federal level, past the state level.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, if you dial the focus just right, you find a single specific place that acts as a perfect lab specimen, a microcosm that explains how all those big blurry trends are actually playing out on the ground.
And that is the concept of the microcosm. And today we are zooming in on Fulton County, New York in the year 2026.
We've got our hands on a document called the Initiatives Guide to 2026 for Fulton County. Now, I'll be honest, when I first saw the title Initiatives Guide, my brain went straight to dusty pamphlet in a DMV waiting room. It doesn't exactly scream page-turner.
It sounds incredibly bureaucratic.
It does. But once I started digging into the sources, I realized this isn't a brochure. It's a blueprint. It's basically a case study on how a rural post-industrial region stops just managing its decline and starts completely reinventing itself.
And that is the key word, reinvention. You have to understand the context. Fulton County is historically known for two very specific things.
Leather and gloves, right?
Exactly. Leather manufacturing, specifically gloves, and being the gateway to the Adirondack wilderness. But the story this guide tells about 2026 is, well, it's radically different. It's not about leather anymore. It's about high-tech, renewable infrastructure, arts-based urban regeneration, and advanced behavioral health.
So our mission today is to unpack how this one county is simultaneously tackling three of the biggest challenges of our decade: the energy crisis, the mental health collapse, and the death of the American downtown.
If I had to boil this whole deep dive down to a single theme, it would be stabilization. We're seeing the stabilization of the power grid, the stabilization of the workforce through better mental health, and the stabilization of the community through the arts.
Stabilization sounds a bit, I don't know, safe, maybe a bit static. But when you read the details in the source material, the work being done is actually pretty aggressive. Let's start with the hardware, the grid.
Okay.
When I say stabilizing the grid, I usually think of politicians signing bills or arguing about regulations. But in Fulton County, that story starts with a company called the Wesson Group.
Based right in Johnstown. Now, unless you are deep in the heavy construction industry, you have likely never heard of them. But they have quietly become a juggernaut in the Northeast.
I was reading the stats on this, and I actually stopped to double-check the source material because I thought it was a typo.
What was it?
As of 2026, Wesson has constructed roughly 90% of the wind farms in New York State.
Wow.
90%. I mean, that is a monopoly-level number.
It is a staggering statistic. It really shows you how specialized this field has become. I mean, you can't just hire any general contractor to put up a wind turbine. These are massive engineering challenges.
Oh, for sure.
But the real insight here is the trajectory. Back in 2025, Wesson had about 300 full-time positions. But look at their portfolio shift. 80% of their contracts are now in renewable energy.
So this isn't a side hustle for them. They've completely pivoted their business model.
Completely. And this challenges a very common misconception. We often think of green energy as this, white-collar, coastal, elite concept, people in suits talking about carbon credits.
Right.
But the reality on the ground, it's blue-collar, it's heavy equipment, it's civil engineers and laborers in upstate New York pouring concrete and managing logistics.
And they aren't just putting up the turbines, right? Because the source material mentions they are moving into the holy grail of renewables.
Battery storage.
Right, because the wind doesn't always blow.
Exactly. The biggest criticism of renewables has always been intermittency. You need to store that power for off-peak times. Wesson isn't just building the generation. They are conducting research and testing on the storage facilities.
Okay, so that's a big deal.
It is. And this is where the microcosm gets interesting. They aren't doing this in isolation. They are leveraging the Tech Valley influence.
I saw that. They're working with the Albany Nanotech Complex and Global Foundries.
Yes.
That seems like a strange bedfellow for a construction firm. I mean, what's the connection there?
Infrastructure. Wesson is doing the heavy civil work for semiconductor chip fabrication facilities. It shows that the line between traditional construction and high-tech engineering is just vanishing.
So you think of a construction company in the Adirondacks, you think roads and bridges.
But But these guys are laying the physical groundwork for microchips and nanotech.
It's almost like they're the physical interface for the digital economy.
That is a great way to put it. They are replacing critical bridges while navigating wildlife conservation, converting old railroad tracks to bike paths like the Maybrook Trailway, and building the substations that power the cloud. It's a complex, multifaceted operation.
And I want to touch on the culture there, too, because
Mhm.
often with these rapid expansions, you hear about companies just grinding their people down.
Hmm.
But the guide mentions a program called Wesson Group Cares.
Right. It notes that 10% of their employees are veterans, which speaks to that disciplined, logistical culture we talked about. But the philanthropic arm is interesting because it's very hands-on.
Yeah, the example that stood out to me was the Barren Winds project in Cohocton.
Yeah.
While they were building this massive energy project, the employees were out volunteering to clean up the Loon Lake Preserve.
It's that philosophy of leaving the campsite better than you found it applied to industrial construction.
So the takeaway for the industrial leg of our stool is pretty clear. The green energy transition isn't magic. It's concrete, steel, and labor, and it's happening in places like Johnstown, not just in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely. Without the human capacity to build it, the policy is just paper.
Okay, so we stabilized the grid. Let's pivot to the streets. Let's talk about downtown Gloversville.
This is what the guide calls the art of revitalization.
Now, for context, we need to talk about the DRI. The source material throws this acronym around a lot.
Right.
It stands for Downtown Revitalization Initiative. Gloversville got a $10 million grant back in 2021. Now, in 2026, we are seeing the results.
And $10 million sounds like a lot, but in urban planning terms, you can burn through that very fast if you aren't careful. What's fascinating here is the strategy they chose. They didn't try to lure in a big box store or an Amazon distribution center to the city center.
They went with arts and culture.
Right. Which historically, skeptics might roll their eyes at. We need jobs, not paintings.
I'll admit, I've had that thought. Can an art gallery really fix a broken economy? It seems. Well, decorative.
It's a fair skepticism. But the economic theory here is creative placemaking. You create a place where people want to be, and the money follows. And Gloversville has a massive asset that you can't build from scratch. Incredible historic architecture.
Let's talk about the Skine Memorial Hall, because this building sounds wild.
It has lived a dozen lives. Built in 1881 as the Casson Opera House. Then in the 1920s, the Skine brothers, who were absolute movie moguls of their day, bought it for their headquarters.
And then nothing. It sat vacant.
For a long time. But look at it in 2026. It's an artists' cooperative workspace and a music school. The DRI funds helped renovate the third floor specifically to attract artists, photographers, sculptors, musicians.
So it's not just a place to look at art. It's a place to make art.
Exactly. It's a workspace. And right nearby, you have the Glove Theater. This is the flagship. The source mentions an $18 million total planned restoration.
That's huge money for a theater renovation.
It is. They're fixing the rigging, the lighting, the acoustics. But here is the key insight. They aren't fixing the theater in a vacuum. They're building an ecosystem around it.
Explain that. What do you mean by ecosystem?
Well, imagine you go to a show at the renovated Glove Theater. Great. But where do you go for dinner? Where do you grab a drink after? If the answer is nowhere, you drive home and the town makes no extra money.
Right, you need a sticky factor. You need to keep the wallet in the zip code.
Exactly. That's why the Casson Carriage House project is so important. It was vacant for 2 decades. Now it's a sports bar and restaurant. It captures that post-show crowd.
And then there's the question of who actually lives there, because a downtown without residents is just a movie set.
That brings us to the Glove City Lofts. This is a $22 million investment by Ken Kearney. He took a vacant commercial structure on Church Street and turned it into 75 units of affordable housing.
And this is the cool part. It includes a 2,000 square foot art gallery in the lobby.
So art is literally built into the housing. It creates a captive audience for the downtown. But I want to highlight a quote from Jennifer Donovan, the downtown development specialist. She makes a very crucial point about expectations. She says, true revitalization takes time.
Yeah, that stood out to me. We're in 2026, 5 years after the grant. She said being half done in 3 years is actually incredibly fast.
We live in an era of instant gratification. We want to see the ribbon cutting the day after the check is signed. But transforming a post-industrial city into a cultural hub is a slow burn.
Right.
They built the piazza, that new public square where the Lidauer building used to be. It's a great space, but it takes years for these spaces to really knit the community back together.
It's about momentum. You stabilize the grid with Wesson. You stabilize the community with the arts.
Mm.
But there's a third leg to this stool, and honestly, looking at the data, this might be the most critical one,
Uh-huh.
the human infrastructure.
You were referring to the Family Counseling Center?
They're celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2026, and they've achieved something that, quite frankly, sounds like a fantasy in the modern American healthcare system.
No wait list.
No wait list. I had to read that twice. In 2026, getting a mental health appointment usually takes months. How did they pull this off?
It wasn't magic, it was a structural change. In 2024, they achieved a specific federal designation called CCBHC,
Let's break that acronym down.
Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic. It sounds like bureaucratic alphabet soup, but it changes the funding model. It allows them to get reimbursed at a rate that actually covers their costs. Because of that status, they were able to hire 50 to 60 new employees.
So it's a supply and demand issue. They finally had the money to create the supply.
Precisely. Michael Countryman, the CEO, notes that access is no longer a barrier. But here is where it connects back to our economy theme. The guide frames mental health explicitly as a workforce issue.
Which makes sense. If you have employees who are struggling with anxiety or depression, or they're worried about their kid at home, they aren't productive.
There's a term for it, presenteeism. You're at your desk, but you aren't working. The Family Counseling Center is attacking this by coordinating directly with employers and primary care providers. They offer virtual services so employees don't even have to leave the job site to talk to a counselor.
That's huge for a blue-collar workforce. You can't just take 3 hours off to drive to a therapist if you're pouring concrete for the Wesson Group.
Exactly. It keeps the workforce stable. But there's another angle here that is a bit more alarming regarding the youth. The section titled, Happy Kids, Happy Parents.
The stats there were rough.
They are concerning. They've seen a 25% increase in mental health issues across the spectrum since COVID. But the shocker is the age group. They are now seeing preschoolers needing help.
Preschoolers, wait, we're talking 3- and 4-year-olds?
That is a demographic they rarely saw before. And for the older kids, the school superintendents are pointing the finger directly at one culprit: invasive social media and 247 connection.
Dr. Sarah Chauncey from the Northville Central School District was quoted on that. She said kids are doing things online that they'd never do face-to-face, and that drama creeps into the school day.
Which disrupts learning. This is why having a facility with no wait list is economic infrastructure. If you can treat the child effectively and immediately, the parents are less stressed, they can focus on work, the teacher can focus on teaching, the whole system functions better.
It's human infrastructure in the truest sense. If the people are broken, the factories and the art galleries don't matter.
Precisely.
Okay, let's move to our final destination. And I mean that literally. The guide calls it Destination Fulton County. We're heading to the water.
The Great Sacandaga Lake.
Now, when I think of a lake in upstate New York, I think of boating, fishing, maybe a nice cabin. I don't usually think of the Atlantis of the Adirondacks. But the history here is heavy.
It is bittersweet. We have to remember the Great Sacandaga Lake isn't a natural lake. It's a reservoir. It was created in 1930 to control flooding in the Hudson Valley. But to do that, they had to execute one of the largest eminent domain actions in New York history.
To build it, they had to submerge 10 distinct communities.
10 communities gone. Scott Huns, the tourism director, points out a haunting reality. People are out there water skiing and fishing right now, completely unaware that they are boating over areas where people's homes, schools, and main streets once stood.
That is a powerful image. It's literally a ghost town underwater. But the guide says Fulton County is trying to bring that history to the surface.
Right, not by draining the lake, obviously.
No, of course not, but by building the Great Sacandaga Lake Discovery Center.
Right. This is opening in late spring or early summer of 2026. It's located on Route 30, which is the main artery for tourism heading up into the Adirondacks.
So it's pitched as a museum and an archive, a place for historians to study this history.
But it's also a strategic economic move. It's designed to stop the drive-through effect. You know, people driving through Fulton County to get to Lake Placid or Lake George, they want them to stop.
And it's not just the center. It's part of a trio of projects. You have the Discovery Center, you have a massive sewer line expansion, which, let's be honest, isn't sexy, but is necessary for growth, and you have Parker's Field.
Oh, the baseball complex. This is a gem.
This isn't just any Little League field, right?
Yeah. This preserves the legacy of baseball legends like Cy Young, Honus Wagner, and Doc Graham. They actually played on those very grounds. The project is turning it into a destination for youth baseball tournaments.
So the strategy is to create a destination that honors the past, even the difficult parts like the eminent domain, while attracting new tourism dollars.
It gives the economy a third dimension. You aren't just an industrial hub or a residential center. You are a destination.
So let's try to pull this all together. We've looked at 2026 Fulton County through three very different lenses.
We have the industrial lens, the Wesson Group stabilizing the power grid, showing us that the green transition is built on blue-collar labor and high-tech integration.
We have the social lens, the Family Counseling Center stabilizing the workforce and the mind. They've proven that with the right funding model, that's CCDHC status, you can actually eliminate wait lists and treat mental health like the emergency it is.
And the cultural lens. Gloversville stabilizing the community spirit through the arts. They aren't just renovating old buildings, they are creating an ecosystem of housing, dining, and entertainment to bring life back to the downtown.
It really shows that you can't just fix an economy by doing one thing. You can't just build wind farms and ignore the downtown. You can't fix the downtown if everyone is too stressed or anxious to enjoy it.
A well-informed citizen or investor in 2026 understands that economic growth is an ecosystem. It requires all three of these legs to stand. If one wobbles, the whole thing falls over.
Which brings us to a final thought. We talked about the Great Sacandaga Lake. We talked about how they had to submerge the past, literally drown those 10 communities, to create a resource for the future, the reservoir that prevents flooding today.
It was a trade-off, a painful, permanent trade-off.
And it makes me wonder, as we look at these high-tech updates to the power grid and the gentrification of these downtown lofts and this push for a new economy, are we doing the same thing today?
That is the question.
What communities or ways of life of the past are we metaphorically submerging right now to build our 2026 future? Every transformation has a cost. The key is to remember what lies beneath the surface.
Something to mull over next time you're charging your electric car or visiting an art gallery in a renovated factory.
And hey, if you're ever in Gloversville, go check out the Piazza. I hear the outdoor movie nights are fantastic.
Indeed. Just remember to bring a jacket. It is still upstate New York.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.